Good afternoon, and thank you for being here today. We're gathered on the traditional territory of the signatories of Treaty 6, and I also want to acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection with this land. I'm joined here today by Linda Scott and Tarame Curtis, who are renters here near Edmonton, and by Irene McDermott, who's a landlord here in Edmonton, along with my fantastic colleague, Alberta NDP Critic for Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, Brooks Arcan-Paul. Among Canada's largest cities, the top two cities seeing the highest rent growth are in Alberta. Based on a report from rentals.ca, Calgary saw the fastest annual growth last month, again, with rents rising 14% more than this time last year. And here in Edmonton, rents have gone up 13.5% in 2023, on top of a 16.8% increase across the province from 2022. And now, as of this week, housing and houselessness has been declared an emergency here in Edmonton. For renters and for those living rough, this is not shocking news. My office consistently receives emails from everyday Albertans who are facing rental increases of 20, 30, even 50%. This is forcing families to stretch their household budgets to a breaking point and make terribly difficult decisions around necessities like groceries and transportation. There are reports of people skipping meals to make ends meet, students dropping out of school or living in their cars. A couple of those folks who reached out to me are here to share their stories, and I would like to first pass things over to Tarame to share hers.
Thank you, Janis.
Thank you, Tarame. Right this way.
My name is Tarame Curtis, and I'm a renter here in Edmonton. I am on AISH and trying to plan as best I can to afford my bills. Groceries and rent, all on a fixed income. My neighbors have steadily been receiving increases of $200 increase in their rent. I see this and just anxiously wait to see if I will also receive the same amount. In my building, I'll get that next month. When I'm scheduled to get that increase notice, it's been unbearable. It really has. Right now in Alberta, there's no limit on how much a landlord can increase your rent. The only limit is they can increase it one time a year. Not knowing when or if mass increases like this will cause anything having to do with it causes a lot of stress. A $200 increase in my rent would mean I would have to sacrifice parts of my budget, like food or my utilities, and I might have to cancel my car insurance. Right now, I take my aunt to cancer treatments and my mom to her medical appointments. I have to drive them. Being on a fixed income, there isn't much room for me to move money around. It just means I'll have to go without. I've been on the rent subsidy list for 7 years. This year will be the year I probably can't afford my rent. So when I heard that Janis was introducing this bill with a 2% increase, I was immediately supportive. While budgeting is hard, everything grows increasingly expensive these days. And knowing the max amount, what my rent will be, is a lot stressful. I hope the government supports this bill because many renters like myself need peace of mind that we won't lose the roof over our heads. Thank you.
Thanks, Tarame. Thank you so much, Tarame. And honestly, the number of stories like yours that we've heard has just been overwhelming. And I'd now like to pass things over to Linda, who'd also like to share her story briefly with us.
Hello, my name is Linda Scott, and I'm a senior citizen that lives in Spruce Grove. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment, and I pay $12.85 every month on rent. My lease is coming up for renewal in February, and I have been informed that my rent will be going up by $300 a month. So now I am left figuring out how I am supposed to afford to pay almost $1,600 a month to live in a small apartment, one that's not even large enough to have a kitchen table to eat at. I have lived and worked in Alberta for over 50 years. Now that I'm retired and living on a fixed income, increases to my bills like this makes me wonder how I will be able to afford groceries. I'm worried. I have written to the Premier to find out what her plan is to address the housing issue that so many people are dealing with, and I did not hear back. Edmonton's homeless population has exploded, and I fear that it will continue to grow as more people like me are given rent increases we cannot afford. I support the bill that Janis Irwin brought forward to the Alberta legislature. This bill will protect seniors like myself who cannot afford a 21% increase to their rent by capping rent increases to manageable levels. Plus, it will make sure the government is setting targets on building more housing so less people will need to worry about ending up on the streets. I hope the Premier supports this bill and shows her support for renters.
Thank you, Linda, for sharing your story and the worry and the uncertainty that you and Tara May have just expressed is what we're hearing from so many Albertans who've reached out to our offices. Every Albertan deserves an affordable place to call home, but this housing crisis we find ourselves in is causing so much more uncertainty. And Danielle Smith and the UCP continue to neglect the housing crisis. They've broken their promise to Edmonton shelters for additional spaces. They've mandated the selling off of the province's affordable housing stock, and they're meeting their own targets on supply. Are missing their own targets on supply, and we'll share those numbers. We need swift and immediate action, and that's why I've brought forward this proposed legislation to increase the reporting and the accountability on housing targets and establish a temporary cap on rental increases so that tenants can catch their breath. I want to hear the perspective from someone else, and that's from Irene, who is a landlord.
Thank you, Janis. Hello, my name is Irene McDermott. I'm a resident of Edmonton, Alberta, and I've been a landlord for residential properties for the last 21 years, both here and in Vancouver. I approached Janis to say that I was very pleased that she was introducing Bill 205. I'm keenly aware of the affordability and houselessness crises in Alberta and other provinces in Canada, and I feel that the cost of housing, along with stagnant wages, have been major contributors to these crises. I feel that Bill 205 will provide some temporary relief to renters in Alberta, and that the rates of a 2% rental cap increase for the next 2 years and then a rental rate increase that reflects inflation are fair and definitely rates that I as a landlord can accept. I have been appalled to hear that some of the renters in Calgary and Edmonton have seen rent increases exceeding 25% in 1 year alone, and that renters all across Alberta are facing excessive rent increases. As a landlord, I cannot see how any landlord can justify these increases. I understand that costs have increased, mine have as well, but not to the amounts that warrant these excessive rent increases on the backs of renters. I have managed to handle my increasing costs and staying well within a 2% increase annually. From my perspective, there should be a mutual benefit in the landlord-tenant relationship. I am fortunate to be able to offer individuals a safe and affordable place to live, and through their rent payments, I have been able to build some assets for myself. I value my connection with my tenants, and although possibly not typical, I have been cognizant of the situations my tenants have faced in the past, and I've had to make adjustments for them, which have allowed them to remain as tenants. These adjustments have not harmed me. And in fact, they have given me and my tenants stability. I view being able to have housing, safe, affordable housing as a basic need and a basic right. When I lived in Vancouver, I was made keenly aware of how the rental housing market can make life so difficult for people and had forced many people into houselessness. It saddens me that the rental market in Alberta, and particularly in Calgary and Edmonton, have gone in the same direction. I cannot imagine how challenging it is for people who do not have safe, affordable housing or are at risk of losing housing. Albertans need this act now, or this bill now. I believe that the immediate rental increase caps recommended in Bill 205 will give Albertans some stability and a chance to catch up. I think it is fair and will go a long way in helping renters during our affordability crisis. I completely support Bill 205 and thank Janis for making this happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you so much, Irene, and I just really appreciate that perspective. It was lovely. Irene had approached me at an event and wanted to share her perspective on this bill, and so thank you for sharing it with Albertans as well. We cannot neglect the housing crisis any longer, and the UCP, as I've said, has refused to show action and leadership. Bill 205 gives Albertans an opportunity to stay in their homes as we see increasing costs across the province. We want to hear what Albertans think. I've been listening to Albertans, meeting with Albertans all across the province. We want to hear their solutions, and tonight at 6:30 p.m. we're hosting an online consultation on our bill. We want to hear from renters, we want to hear from landlords, we want to hear from all Albertans who are impacted by the housing crisis and hear their thoughts on this proposed legislation. And people can register at albertasfuture.ca. It's not too late. But before we take questions, I want to briefly respond to an announcement made earlier today by the UCP on encampments here in Edmonton. Minister Nixon has been asked repeatedly to provide the public with information on emergency shelter spaces in the province. Instead of being transparent, he's told Albertans to take him at his word, continually saying that there are enough shelter spaces in Edmonton. Even if we did have the public data to confirm this, shelter spaces are not enough. Shelters are a Band-Aid, and there are many reasons why people choose not to stay in shelters. While the UCP wants Albertans to believe they are taking action with funding for shelters, I want to remind all of you that there is historic shelter funding because there is historic houselessness in this province. And criminalizing houselessness does not work. Forcing people into treatment or into shelter spaces where they don't feel safe does not work. Moving people on a bus between spaces where they do not have a community and cannot stay permanently won't give people what they need, a home. It is proven that housing people is more cost effective and yields higher success for those who are experiencing houselessness and to get out of that cycle of houselessness as well. We need permanent supportive housing with wraparound services to get people off the streets. No more mats on the floors, no more temporary Band-Aid shelter spaces, and certainly not forced treatment or incarceration simply because someone does not have a home. Thank you, and we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you're on Zoom, it's the raise hand function. If you're on the phone, it's *9 to get in the question queue. Please state your name and outlet and who you'd like to direct your question to. We'll start first in the room. No, we'll go to the phones. Michelle, your line should be open.
Ask you about this morning's news conference from the province. So they're creating this navigation support center at the Cara Center of the Hope Mission. So I guess I just want to get your general reaction to that first.
Yes, Michelle, thank you. I did just share my thoughts, and I can tell you, myself and my colleague Brooks and others in our caucus are incredibly concerned about the approach that the UCP are taking. My position all along is that we need housing. We need permanent supportive housing. We need the wraparound supports that will get people off the streets and keep them off the streets. And we're not hearing that from the UCP. Instead, we're hearing about shelter spaces that we know folks don't want to use. I've urged the minister multiple times to come walk with me in the communities that I represent, to hear the stories of folks who are living on the streets, hear from them why they don't want to stay in shelters. And he refuses. And he refuses to answer my questions on data around shelter spaces. We need accountability. We need leadership from the UCP, and we're not seeing it.
And I'm wondering, as a follow-up, I know this morning that the police chief said that encampments, they're going to start taking them down at an accelerated pace. And according to a tweet from Brad LaFortune, it looks like that they are starting on taking down an encampment currently on Gateway Boulevard. So I'm wondering, this accelerated pace of removing these encampments, what effect do you think that will have on the homeless population in this city?
I'm worried. I'm so worried. I had the opportunity to be at the 8 encampment sweeps that happened, all of which happened in my riding of Edmonton, Highlands, Norwood. And while we were told by the province and others that there would be supports for people and there was a narrative out there that somehow people were being housed, we know that's not the case. Instead, what happened is people were literally moving their camp from one location to another location blocks away. And so when the minister says that there are safe, accessible places for people to go, he's not being truthful. And again, I can tell the minister time and time again, and I have, that we know what the solutions are. Permanent supportive housing, wraparound services. There are Indigenous-led projects that are happening in my community that are working. We need a whole lot more of that, and we need it now.
Thank you. We'll just do one more quick pass for questions. Just a reminder, if you're on Zoom, it's the raise hand function. If you're on the phone, it's *9. Seeing none, that concludes our press conference for today. Thank you.